Alas, 12,000 pedestrians were killed in those 2 years. So, the next time you hear the airplane door closing, say, "Thank God, now I'm safe." You are safer on an airplane than virtually anywhere else in the United States. So how come if you have an airplane phobia, you're not cured? We'll learn later that words, knowledge, rational logic, and even facts cannot cure phobic fears. Only experiential victories, purposeful exposures to the thing one fears, cure phobic and obsessional fears. I will devote an entire chapter teaching you how to get them. I have a perverse hobby of collecting annoying ways to die. Events such as a wheel falling off of an airplane, clashing through the roof of a house, and killing the bedroom occupants. There was an incident in Germany where a train derailed. The front wheels of the locomotive broke free and rolled 1.5 miles into town, crashed through the wall, and you guessed it, into the bedroom, killing the bedroom occupants. We are not even safe in our own bedrooms. Annoyingly, there is a risk to living. Until you are willing to recognize and accept that risk, you will never be free to live your expansive dreams. Phobies class format. The class format parallels the chapters in this book. It begins with education as to the origin, physiology, and biochemistry of anxiety. It is important to understand that your condition is primarily genetic. You were born predisposed to develop an anxiety disorder. That knowledge allows you to dispel any shame and guilt you may have concerning your disorder. As you have read, they are not a sign of insanity or a lack of courage, a sign of weakness, immaturity, or neuroses. They are genetic and curable. I wish I had known that during my phobach years. The second part of the phobies approach is cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Cognition is the sum total of your mental skills. It is the totality of your knowledge, social upbringing, your personal experiences, and coping skills that you bring to resolving psychological challenges. CBT is a discipline that helps you identify those thoughts and beliefs that foster your anxiety and create unhappiness and depression. In essence, all phobaks know how to scare the hell out of ourselves with what we say to ourselves. Cognitive restructuring teaches you how to handle and challenge those destructive or scary beliefs. Finally, the most important part of any effective anxiety program is experiential desensitization. In real English, that means learning how to safely and gradually creep up on any fear. Experiential means you can't just think, imagine, or read your way to a cure. You must experience it in real life. The only way to cure a phobia or obsession is through repeated experiential victories. A victory is the purposeful exposure to the thing you fear. There are no shortcuts. The only way out is through. So, if you have not had a psychoeducational, cognitive behavioral, experiential desensitization therapy program, you have not been appropriately trained. In the future, if you are seeking further therapy, you simply ask, "Do you do cognitive behavioral therapy?" Then you'll be able to evaluate the therapist's approach in light of what you learned in this book. Avoidance. The disease of all phobias and obsessions is avoidance. The first time you avoid something because of fear is when the disease begins. And once it begins, it has a life of its own, and it keeps getting worse. Avoidance is rehearsing fear. Avoidance is magnifying fear. Every time you avoid, you are practicing negative reinforcement, a psychological phenomenon that unknowingly strengthens your fear. The cure? Non-avoidance. Have you ever waded into a swimming pool? You get up to your mid-thighs and decide the next step deeper will be very uncomfortable, so you get out of the pool and warm up. But the next time you go into the pool, it's just as cold. Finally, you decide enough of this nonsense. You dive in, swim vigorously for a few strokes, and in a short time, your body gets used to the invigorating temperature. That process is called habituation. That is the exact process you will copy when you are ready to cure your anxiety disorder. Up until now, every time you got anxious, you left the cold pool and warmed up. And every time you did that, you got to keep your phobia for another day, another week, and another lifetime. What all of us have to eventually find out is that if we stay in an anxiety situation and use the tools, we will learn the body will habituate and the anxiety will go away, and we will have started on a pathway to cure. One of my 15 or so phobias was shopping malls. When I got anxious, I would hurriedly leave. And guess what? My anxiety would go away rapidly. What a wonderful lesson. As soon as you get anxious, run, do not walk, to the nearest exit, and you will see a rapid diminishment of your discomfort. But then you get to keep your phobia for another disgusting day, terrifying week, and depressing lifetime. For 31 years, I did the exact opposite of what I needed to cure. I constantly exited the cold pool, warmed up in the comfort of absent anxiety, and never habituated. I never found out that if I stayed, the anxiety and my phobia would go away. People always ask me how I could have been anxious for 31 years. Well, I wasn't anxious for 31 years. I avoided for 31 years. I could find an excuse to get out of anything. I never had a panic attack in an exotic foreign country. I never went to any. I never had a panic attack on a cruise ship because I never boarded one. Unbeknown to me, every time I never went, I was reinforcing my fear. I only went places where I was safe, where I could be in control, drive my own car, and be able to leave the scene at the first symptom of anxiety. I left that pool more times than I could tell you, thus constantly rehearsing and reinforcing my fear. Once a phobia or obsession begins, untreated, it gets worse. It begins a process called generalization. Simply, it increases in scope and intensity. What started for me in a classroom spread to theaters, restaurants, planes, bridges, conference rooms, and courtrooms. Over time, my life became more and more constricted. At the height of my phobia, I was warm and safe only in my home and at the hospital. I became a very dedicated physician. I didn't know that if I did the exact opposite, practice dedicated non-avoidance, I would lose my demons in weeks. Stay in the cold pool and cure. What has evolution got to do with it? Why have fear? There is a science called neuroethnology that explains neural and biochemical events from an evolutionary standpoint. It appears that every species, from guppies to man, can be divided into conservative and bold categories. A simple experiment demonstrates this nicely. A group of bold and conservative guppies were placed in a small rubber pool with one hungry bass. There was ample floating vegetation for the conservative guppies to hide behind. Now, the bold guppies demonstrated their bravado by venturing out to assess whether the bass was a threat. 24 hours later, there were no bold guppies left. There is obvious survival benefits to being fearful. I'm sure that bold cavemen ventured out to see whether the local visitor was a vegetarian brontosaurus or a meat-eating tyrannosaurus, while the phobox stayed in the cave, decorating the walls for future generations. I assume many bold cavemen failed to return. Thus, we are evolutionarily designed to be fearful in order to survive. More important, survival systems tend to be exquisitely sensitive. They are set on a hair trigger, a term that applies to target shooting. The amount of force to move the trigger is set so low that barely touching it discharges the weapon. If you had to pull the trigger hard, it would jerk the barrel off target and you wouldn't hit the bullseye. We have a smoke alarm in our kitchen that goes off at the slightest provocation. That's the kind of fire alarm you want. It wouldn't be too practical if it only sounded a warning when the flames are 15 feet high. A light tanning piece of toast sets it off. That's the same way the body guarantees survival. Our survival mechanisms are overly sensitive. You can choke on saliva or water, but you can't choke to death on liquids. Nevertheless, they perpetuate the same life-saving cough reflex. You can choke on a chicken or fish bone, but you can't choke to death on them. To choke to death, for those of you who have that fear, you must be deeply intoxicated to suppress the cough reflex, and then swallow a piece of meat 2 inches by 3 inches to cover the entire larynx. One piece of popcorn or a normal bite-sized mass won't do it. In your brain, you have 2 small pea-sized structures called amygdalae. These are your storehouses for survival information, your command center. If at any time you perceive, accurately or not, that you are in danger, the amygdalae will hijack all of your brain processes to mobilize it for mortal combat. They will entreat a huge outpouring of survival hormones that you will experience as fear and anxiety. The response is instantaneous. It doesn't ponder or weigh alternatives. It simply explodes in an all-out effort to save your life. Fight or flight. We are all familiar with a fight or flight mechanism. When the body faces a mortal threat, a powerful drug is secreted called adrenaline. Instantly, the body is transformed into an incredible fighting machine, capable of superhuman feats. You've read stories of the 70-year-old grandmother who goes out in the yard to find her grandson pinned under a car that has slipped off its jacks. Grandma runs over and lifts the car, and the grandson crawls out. Now, you need a force of 700 pounds to lift the corner of a car. But when CNN comes out the next day to investigate the story, Grandma can only generate 100 pounds. So where did the other 600 pounds come from? It was a secretion of the powerful hormone adrenaline. It is a drug designed to help you fight a saber-toothed tiger, those prehistoric 1,000-pound pussycats. Whenever you feel anxious, you have squirted adrenaline. That means that every symptom you experience when anxious is normal preparation for mortal combat. More importantly, that means that adrenaline is a normal body function, and no normal body function leads to death or disease. Anxiety does not lead to heart attacks, strokes, or insanity. It just makes you uncomfortable, and by now, you are an expert at discomfort. Innumerable studies of panic have shown that the chest pain and heart discomfort you feel when anxious is not due to a lack of blood getting to the heart, meaning cardiac ischemia, but rather more blood flowing into the muscles of the chest. I always ask my classes, how many people here have had panic attacks? Virtually everyone, including myself, raises their hand. And then I ask, how many people have died of their panic attacks? Everybody utters the nervous giggle, because they're thinking, well, not yet, but what about the next one? That's when I hold up that famous package of marshmallows and proclaim, anxiety attacks are no more dangerous than dropping these marshmallows on your bare feet. I point out further that these are the big marshmallows and not the minis. Panic attacks are not a physiological threat. Pulse rates and respiration are in the mild exercise range. Since 90% of people experience anxiety, if it were deadly, you would have to climb over a mountain of bodies just to get to the neighborhood market. We don't die from anxiety and panic, and we never will. Every symptom you experience when anxious can be explained as a useful preparation for mortal combat. Your hands sweat for the same reason baseball players spit on their hands before holding the bat, so you can grasp your assailant more securely and choke them. Your stomach hurts because if you're fighting for your life, you don't need to digest yesterday's hamburger. The blood is shunted away from the bowel to the heart and muscles because they are needed to fight better. The heart pounds because more blood is pumping to the fighting muscles. Why do you have a feeling of bowel and bladder urgency? The body wants them empty in mortal combat. If your opponent slices open your bowel, you won't soil yourself and cause infection. You may get numb and feel detached and dissociated. This results from the secretion of another substance called endorphins. Endorphins are 200 times more powerful than morphine. Their secretion creates a wonderful state for a warrior, imperviousness to pain. Fueled by adrenaline, every anxious bodily symptom is preparation for mortal combat, a great drug for fighting the saber-toothed tiger, but not for driving onto a freeway, speaking in public, or dealing with any of your phobic situations. Fight, flight, and freeze. While we are quite familiar with fighting and flighting, There's another response to the perception of mortal threat: freezing. Animals, when threatened, become motionless because fight might provoke a sudden attack. Flight might provoke a sudden attack. There are a number of freezing responses that have survival benefits. When called on to speak, it is common to experience a temporary paralysis of the vocal cords so that no sound can be uttered. From an evolutionary standpoint, that would be useful. Crying out would reveal your position to your enemy. In very shy children, there is a condition called selective mutism, an inability to speak in certain social situations. I believe this is an adaptive survival response to a larynx frozen in fear. There are two things animals can't do under mortal threat: urinate and fornicate. A condition called periuresis, paralysis of urination, shy or bashful bladder, occurs when people cannot urinate in certain social environments. Similarly, impotency is common with extreme performance anxiety. These are all symptoms of target organ freezing due to adrenaline. You relieve the anxiety and you cure these disorders. Adrenaline, the 10-minute drug. Adrenaline, one of the most powerful drugs in the body, incredibly lasts for only about 10 minutes. If your child was having an asthma attack and you brought him into the emergency room when I was working, I would give him an injection of 1/10,000th milligrams of adrenaline, and the attack would immediately cease. But if it wasn't cured, the symptoms might recur shortly, and the injection might have to be repeated. That's because of the short duration of the action of adrenaline. So let me ask you a question. If I asked you to stay drunk for an entire weekend, what would you have to do? Obviously, keep drinking, because if you stopped, you'd sober up. So here's a more challenging question. How can you stay anxious for an entire weekend with the drug that only works for 10 minutes? This is where I take out the first small squirt gun in class. With each negative or scary statement I make, I squirt some water into a resonant tin plate. What's happening to me? Squirt. Maybe there's some disease that the doctors haven't found. Squirt. Why is God punishing me? Squirt. I get out a bigger water gun and continue with much more forceful squirts. What if I never get over this? Squirt. What if it gets worse and I can't leave home? Squirt. What if I lose my job? Squirt. And by now, I've got the super soaker, a huge water gun that squirts a torrent of water. What if I become homeless? Whoosh. What if I lose my license? Whoosh. What if my wife leaves me? Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Every negative or scary thought, statement, belief, or dream is accompanied by a shot of the most powerful drug in your body, adrenaline. It's not a voodoo god in New York creating your anxiety. It's you. You will soon learn how to stop it. Look at the following list of symptoms caused by the secretion of adrenaline and circle those that you have experienced. These were all mine. Blurred or distorted vision, can't swallow, chest pain, choking sensation, clenched teeth, cold hands and feet, depersonalization, detachment or a dreamlike state, diarrhea, dissociation or feeling separated from your body, dizziness, dry mouth, faintness, easy startle, fatigability, meaning easily becoming tired, fear of doing the uncontrollable, fear of dying, fear of going crazy, fear of vomiting, feeling of impending doom, feeling of unreality, fidgetiness, flushing, headache, holding breath, hot or cold flashes, hyperventilation or overbreathing, irritable bowel, jumpiness, lightheadedness, loss of appetite, loss of balance, lump in the throat, muscle aches, muscle tension, muscle weakness, nausea, numbness, pallor, that's where you turn white as a sheet, palpitations, rapid heart rate, restlessness, sexual dysfunction, shakiness, shallow breathing, shortness of breath, skin problems like itching or burning, smothering sensation, stomach pains, sweating, tight chest, tingling in arms, face, or legs, trembling, tunnel vision, unsteady feeling or your knees shake, urinary frequency, urinary or bowel urgency, vomiting, and weakness. Did you circle all 59? All of these symptoms are the result of the secretion of a normal reaction to threat. However, if you look carefully, many of these could mimic significant disease. You see, doctors are symptom trained. For that reason, anxious patients with somatic symptoms are often exposed to a multitude of unnecessary medical tests and procedures. Led astray by their symptoms, 70% of anxious patients are not diagnosed correctly. The brain in the bag. I hold up my life-size rubber brain and ask,